Geeta from the Thames Valley Housing Association, but also in part responsible for setting up Fizzy Living as well. And I put my foot in it earlier because I said I'd heard Tom on the radio, and when I turned it on, I didn't hear your name at the beginning, so apologies. But if you'd like to talk to us about your particular pitch on housing, and I think we've got the right... We have got the right slide. Well done, that person. Thank you very much at the back. So, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I started working in housing in the late 80s, and there was a massive housing crisis. And I think absolutely what Kate said is that we've seen over the decades, there's a housing crisis, we've never solved it. But when I started working in housing, I worked in a wet hostel where, so that people were allowed, they're wet hostels, you're allowed to bring drink in. You're not usually allowed to bring drink in anymore into hostels. But also, there was a massive amount of people in bed and breakfast accommodation, in temporary accommodation, and rough sleepers. And I don't know if anybody in the room remembers, there's probably a quarter of you will, at Waterloo, where you had rough sleeping, all down underneath that walkway through to Waterloo Station. And there was a political will and determination that we shouldn't have temporary accommodation and people in bed and breakfast anymore. The way to solve it, targets were set, diktats were delivered, but there was a real political will to get rid of rough sleeping, and you may say some of it moved on, etc., but there was a political will, and with a political will you can achieve a huge amount. And what we've seen is social housing actually being a dirty word, and I think if anything, the events, really tragic events at Grenfell, it's okay to talk about social housing again, and a bit of the white paper saying that we have a housing crisis, the market is broken. It's okay to say we need subsidised rented homes again. And almost, having worked in housing associations for a long period of time, there was a whole period where we weren't almost allowed to talk about it, that it was all about intermediate products for people, earning a certain amount of salary, but those who earn very little, there wasn't anything for them, and we weren't even allowed to say there was anything for them. So I think, there is hopefully a nugget there for us to go back to saying, actually, there is a lot of product, a lot of homes being produced for people at this end of the market, less in the middle, but actually the massive, massive need is for those whose incomes are lower. Unless you start paying people a lot more, we're never going to end the housing crisis, and therefore we need to start talking again about that sort of subsidy and those subsidised homes. So, actually it's a great time to be working in a housing association, because you kind of feel like you've got your mojo back again, and you can start pushing for things. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a trot through of some of the things that we've done in housing as housing associations, and just end on one, because I know you've all talked about modern methods of construction, institutional investment, the land, green belt, etc. So we kind of know there's a multitude of answers in order to address the housing crisis, and we need the political will and long-termism to do it. So I remember, again, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when you asked somebody, well, what is a housing association? People used to say, oh, you're part of the local authority, and say, no, we're not part of the local authority, we're independent organisations, we work across a much bigger area. My relatives back, in Thailand and India would say, oh, you own that many properties. I go, no, sadly I don't own that many properties, and you try and explain what a housing association was. When we went out as Thames Valley Housing to set up Fizzy and to bring institutional investors, they say, and we talk about what a housing association is, they say, oh, I'd like to buy you. And I go, no, you can't buy us. And it's, actually quite a complicated thing to describe what a housing association to people who don't know. But those sort of charitable roots are really deep. And when we started as a sector, all those years ago, Guinness, Peabody, Octavia Hill, these were organisations that had a philanthropic base and were there to provide homes for their workers. And from that, we've expanded quite a lot. So TVH, we were set up in the 60s. Quite a lot of housing associations were set up in the 60s. But we are actually our charitable subsidiary, so we're a housing association and the parent is a housing association, but it's non-charitable, we have a charitable subsidiary, was not set up till 1986. And we set up a market sale division in 2011 with a joint venture with Galliford Try, and we've built over 500 homes together through that in Fizzy. We set up Fizzy in 2012, then brought in institutional investment, and we did a PFI again joint venture in 2013. So you can see that as an organisation, there's a long time where you're kind of doing things on your own, and then there's been a real growth in terms of partnerships and how that's sort of changed us. But also, we kind of do all these things, in terms of tenures. So we've done every government initiative, and there's been, they're too long to list around intermediate housing, do-it-yourself shared ownership, key worker housing, intermediate rent, now discounted market rent. There's a whole range of products, but it's all about housing people on different income groups. But that means that because we've been around since this time, we've got a huge amount of information and data around what works, what doesn't work, what really is affordable, what experiences people, tenants have. I can tell you about how long people stay in market rent because we've got a management portfolio. There's a huge amount of information and data and a huge amount of challenges we've had over the years in order to produce this. So we were set up by architects, and I would love to say that our first home was beautiful. It was of its time. But in the beginning, we, as housing associations, we had those small bits of land and we did small-scale development. And, we were never there to house the majority of people who were accepted as homeless. We were always there as the partner, and the local authority had that responsibility. And over time, the local authority has still got the responsibility, but not the means. So your whole challenge around council house building, how can you have all that responsibility but not the means to do it? There is a real disconnect there, and I think that's something that needs to be. And then we were involved in a lot of areas like, Notting Hill, Shepherd's Bush, regenerating, taking these street properties that were completely run down, buying them up, refurbishing them and using them, and those whole areas changed as a result of some of the work that was done. There's loads of pictures and loads of stories about how crammed conditions were and how poor conditions were and how the refurbishment of these areas have changed. And housing associations have done massive regeneration projects over the years. And I think it's really interesting. I know Haringey yesterday there was a huge demonstration because the local authority is putting a lot of its assets into a new vehicle with Lend-Lease and is about to sort of regenerate Tottenham. And I think, this kind of loss of social housing as a result of regeneration is a big issue. But we need to think about it quite carefully and about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And when it's done well, it's beautiful, and it really, really works. So regeneration is a big area, and it's something we need to keep focusing on. And then we had the old Section 106 schemes, and the gentleman about talked about setting a value for market rent. Well, affordable housing has got that value. It depends if you do shared ownership, it depends if you do affordable rent or London living rent, etc. But there's a kind of clear line about what should be provided and what the cost of that is. But really, a lot of these schemes, some of them work, but some of them don't work because you're buying units. They haven't always been built to the specification you want them to be built to, but it's a real means of providing more affordable housing, and over the years it's continued. We need to continue working with house builders to ensure that we're getting Section 106 and still building affordable housing. That's not going to change, and that's still part of the answer. So as well as regeneration, as well as Section 106 and having the means to provide affordable housing, we need to carry on doing this. And there's care and support. Not many people talk about, there's the volume of house building that's required, but actually great care villages, supported housing schemes for those who either have been homeless and are working their way back, have learning disabilities, have mental health issues, are older, are frail, need care. there's a whole load of people out there, and housing associations have always worked to provide that supported housing. And at the moment, we're not building any because the revenue, the ways by which it's paid for, has completely changed, and it's stopped all supported housing. I don't think people really understand that and know what the consequences of this is going to be in a couple of years' time for young people, for older people, if those changes don't happen. So we're not building any new supported housing for those most vulnerable people, and we need to carry on doing that. And now, and I suppose this is the crux of it, we can be part of the answer, and the part of the answer that we can be now is more partnerships. That is how we're going to get the most out of housing associations and in terms of solving the housing crisis. So this is a scheme that we're doing in joint venture with Galliford Try. It's for just under 1,000 units. It was a GLA land release scheme, and we're going to be building just under 1,000 homes for mixed tenure, for sale, for rent, affordable rent, and for PRS. And, we on our own could never have done a scheme of that size, and it's because we've had this partnership and it's worked over a number of years that we've been able to do that. Fizzy are taking the PRS. The affordable housing has actually been taken by another housing association because we don't work in that area, and the sale unit's 50-50 in terms of risk. This is how housing associations can play a part. And finally, this is another thing that we're doing. We're working with NHS trusts. It's quite a small scheme, this one, but we're doing the market sale in our own name, but also key worker housing, using NHS land. How can we get partnerships together so that we can have step-down accommodation for people in emergency, taking up emergency beds? How can we house people that are coming to this country to work in the NHS and need a base in which to do it? How can we cross-subsidise from other activities in order to provide some of that, using the land value, but also using market sale and other activities that we do? And this is part of the sort of solution for us. So just finally then, we're around a long time. We've always got a long-term agenda. Sometimes other people can do it. Sometimes we can do it. Sometimes we can play a big part. Sometimes we can play a small part. We can be a partner of choice. We don't have all the skills. A lot of other organisations do have that. We put purpose before profit, but we need profit in order to get the purpose, and multi-tenure and building lots of homes is part of the solution. So I'll just put there.